I nominated you for this position, you said that you'd always give me your honest advice and informed counsel. You have. When it's mattered most, behind closed doors, in the Oval Office, you've always given it to me straight. And for that, I will always be grateful.
Well, many people are wondering if maybe he was giving it to the president too straight. And this is the third Secretary of Defense that has served this administration. And many people are wondering what in the world. Now, the very best face humanly possible was put on this morning at the presser that occurred at the White House, with the president making comments. And then when Mr. Hagel stepped forward, to his right was the president, to his left was the vice president. And it was, if anybody was not aware of the circumstances, it almost seemed like a bit of a love fest. But apparently there have been some interesting behind-closed-door meetings, and we have our 2nd District Congressman joining us right now, Chris Stewart, on the line. And Chris, what's your take on what unfolded just less than a half hour ago?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised, and I'm not the only one. I've spoken with some very senior officials at the Pentagon within the last few days, and there just wasn't a hint of this in the air, at least that we were aware of. I think it's something that's been happening on the White House side, and you know, Doug, it speaks to, I think, this president's style and his suspicion and the difficulty he has had working with military officials. And I hope we get a good replacement. I hope we get one very quickly. It's important that we do.
We are hearing rumblings that there are several people on the short list. One is Michelle Flournoy, who is the former Undersecretary of Defense, served with Leon Panetta. We have Senator Jack Reed, Democrat of Rhode Island. And then also he was in the Army's 82nd Airborne. And then Ashton B. Carter, who is a former Deputy Secretary of Defense. Are you hearing any other names rumbling about?
No, I really haven't, Doug. But again, this is so sudden, and it's taken so many people by surprise. I'm surprised, frankly, that there would be that list there. I just think it's really early in the process. But you know, whoever it might be, they're going to have some meaningful challenges. You know, we've got a situation where the White House has micromanaged the Defense Department to an incredible degree, not something we haven't seen really since the Vietnam War, where you have White House officials actually engaged in target selection. I mean, that goes right back to Lyndon Baines Johnson and what they did during Vietnam. And at the same time, they want them to be a vocal advocate for the administration's policy. But it's like, how do you defend smoke? Who knows what this policy is? Who can stand up and say this is the administration's policy towards Syria, or this is the administration's policy towards ISIS? I don't know what that is. I don't think the administration knows what that is. At least they haven't articulated it. And then to criticize and fire their top official at the Department of Defense because they haven't done a good job of advocating for that policy, well, it hardly seems consistent to me.
When Mr. Gates left and when Leon Panetta left, were there? I'm trying to recall. You know, we've gone through so many secretaries of defense over the last little while. Were there some of the same concerns that perhaps it was just a very, very differing matter of opinion on where the U.S. military should be going versus what the White House wanted?
Well, I don't know. I think Secretary Gates is one of the stronger leaders that we've had within the Department of Defense, and he was a strong advocate. And frankly, I think that's the reason they brought in Secretary Hagel, was because here was a Republican that the administration had asked to help with the dismantling to some degree of the department. They knew that they were going to be cutting their budgets. They wanted a little bit of political cover in that, and that, I think, is one of the reasons. And they've actually admitted this, that they wanted a Republican, someone from the opposite side of the aisle, to preside over that effort. It helped to provide them with cover and made the politics of that a little more palatable. Secretary Gates would have never have done that. He would have been much more vocal in opposition to some of the things the administration has done. At least that's my opinion, that he would have been. Whereas Secretary Hagel was someone who's a little more passive, a little more accommodating to the president. But even this secretary reached a point, I think, where the conflict was just too obvious, and they together decided they could not serve together any longer.
The situation we find ourselves in the world, I don't know how many red lines we've passed, how many lines in the sand we've passed, how many we will not allow this to happen we have passed. And now we have some rather unprecedented things occurring, including a flexing of muscle by the Russian bear that we haven't seen literally in decades. Are we beginning to see the fruits of the labor here from the administration and those who have run the Defense Department and who have ultimately resigned and left?
I just think there's no question that is exactly true, Doug. And I think you and I have talked about this a number of times before. When your position is that you can withdraw American influence around the world, and that there won't be any repercussions from that. This idea, if you think of American exceptionalism, is no different than British exceptionalism or German or Japanese exceptionalism. If you believe that the United States doesn't have a predominant role in leading and being the example to the world, and this president has advocated for that. He has articulated those ideas. And it leaves the world a much more dangerous and a much more chaotic place, and that's exactly what we're seeing now. You know, having spent a significant amount of time in the Middle East through the summer, and you would talk to people in Jordan, and you'd ask them, what is our policy towards Syria, towards President Bashar al-Assad? What is the U.S. policy towards that? You would get an answer. You'd go to Egypt and ask the same thing, and you'd get a different answer. You'd go to Israel and ask U.S. officials there, and you'd get a different answer. Even the own administration doesn't understand what their policies are throughout the Middle East. And then, like you said, you have the rise of Russia. There's no question we're at the gates of a new Cold War. And it's going to define our national security for a generation if that develops as it's developing now. And it's so troubling to me, and I've expressed this so many times, when we have a president who isn't willing to have the U.S. lead like the world needs the U.S. to lead, and it leads to so much trouble and chaos.
Chris, I appreciate our conversation. We've got a break for our news. I hope that you and your family have a very happy Thanksgiving, and I appreciate you always joining us here at KSL.
Thank you, Doug. We all have so much to be grateful for. Let's remember that.
Yeah, we truly do. Congressman Chris Stewart with us here at KSL News Radio.